na tutakutana huko. Na wacha niseme na hasira kidogo, lakini kwa amani. Tutarudi na tukishamaliza tutarevisit hii mambo yenu. Ndipo tunauliza kila saa, kila pahali tukienda, jaji amesema tunafanya kazi hii, unakuja una block, unaweka injunction. Kwani unafikiria wewe umechaguliwa na nani? No, there's a problem and we must fix it. Going forward, we must fix it. We must fix that problem. We have a problem with our judiciary, but regardless, we respect, but we shall revisit. We shall respect, but we shall revisit this agenda. Oh yes, we shall. First and foremost, we shall address ourselves to the people of Kenya. Can you imagine?
Okay, so Treasury slashed the Judiciary's budget by 3 billion shillings last month, and the judicial system, the legal fraternity, says this cannot work. Basically, we are crippled, we cannot move from here. And there's so many implications on this. So the question that's on the minds of Kenyans is, having watched President Uhuru Kenyatta in 2017, is this quote-unquote revisit, or is this a genuine issue that needs to be looked at from a different perspective? I know the money is being raised to cater for Big Four agenda, but the question is, can it be done at the expense of the judiciary? And that's why we're speaking to Nelson Havi and Mercy Wambua. Nelson Havi is a lawyer, Mercy Wambua is the CEO LSK. Havi, just listening into President Uhuru Kenyatta in 2017, he said we shall revisit. Do you get the feeling that perhaps this is revisit? Because one would say by underfunding the judiciary, you're basically looking at a collapsed judicial system.
I do not really think it's an issue of revisiting. My evaluation will be that the action that has been taken is not premeditated, but is most likely to be reckless or negligent. Reason being, there is an economic crunch that is affecting the entire economy in Kenya. And if you look at it from that perspective, you will realize that there is a problem that is wider than the judiciary itself. But what is more important is this. The judiciary is a single organ that it will be very catastrophic if supply to that organ will be curtailed or limited in the manner in which they're doing. Because there are other investigative departments of the government whose budget has not been cut. For instance, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, the Director of Public Prosecution, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission still have their entire budget full. So it cannot be explained why, at this particular moment, there is need to cut the budget for the judiciary, yet the judiciary is supposed to perform a very fundamental role towards ensuring that there is access to justice.
Mercy, you said, quote, there seems to be an upward trend of misappropriation of public funds set aside for various arms of government, which in turn leads to directives for unexplained and unforeseen budget cuts to cover up for missing funds without the regard to the provision of the Constitution and approved legitimate expenditures of the affected parties and organs of the government. So basically looking at this, and I was speaking to some of your colleagues and they're saying, look, if you don't fund the judiciary and if indeed we implement these budget cuts, then this will directly affect the fight against corruption. So it's not just the services within the judiciary, it trickles down to so many other things.
True, the effects of the budget cuts that we have been implemented by the National Treasury on judiciary, it's quite diverse. It's not only going to affect the Kenyan citizens who will not be able to access justice easily, but it will also affect generally the economy of the country. If we cannot be able to resolve cases the best way we should without delay, then investors will definitely go away. They will not have confidence into our economy. And at the end of the day, the effects will be dire to the entire country. We've also seen a lot of growth in terms of ease of doing business, which has attracted a lot of international goodwill of investors into our country. if the 50% budgetary cuts are implemented and we bring the judiciary to a halt, then definitely we are going to affect the entire economy.
From where you sit, what are the key services that will be affected that Kenyans should look out for even if this budget cut is implemented?
That will have operationalized the tribunals. We have already seen lots of tribunals are not sitting as we speak. We have seen the cut in terms of the courts that move in circuit to go to where the Kenyans are to take justice there. For instance, the Court of Appeal in Malindi, it can't be able to sit in Malindi, and litigants and advocates have to go to Mombasa. That in itself has economic challenges. In the cases of criminal cases, they will have to, we might have witnesses who will not be able to travel to where the court is sitting. So definitely that is going to affect dispensation of justice. The circular talks about cutting 50% in terms of stationery. Honestly, how can a court be able to operate without stationery? How will the court be able to operate without the minimum of even internet that they can be able to access and even be able to research and write judgments?
Harvey, the economic outlook of the country is not as good as we want it to be. In fact, in one of the dailies yesterday, when IMF was releasing its report, someone said there's economic growth, but it's infrastructure-led growth, which means it's not translating to people's pockets. And it's a non-issue that Kenya has lots of debt, international and local. So from where you sit, the Treasury CS, Acting Treasury CS says, we need to cut this budget so that we can be able to fund the Big Four. Is there any point at which the legal fraternity, the judiciary, is willing to cede a little ground just to ensure that we can save a little bit of money for other projects?
No, it will not be appropriate at this particular point where the economy of the country is, so to speak, dwindling, to cut the budgetary allocation to the judiciary. There are many other sectors of the expenditure that can be trimmed down, but not the judiciary, because the judiciary plays a fundamental role towards ensuring that the wheels of justice do not come to a halt. And if you are to suppress the operations of the judiciary in the manner in which the intention of this circular is to be implemented, then the end result will have a very drastic effect in the entire economy of the country. And as I've indicated much earlier, why not cut the budget for other departments of government that are not as vital as the judiciary? The judiciary is compared to the heart, because the heart is such a single vital organ whose function cannot be limited in any way whatsoever. So that, look, within a period of less than a month, the effects of this intended action have been felt. We do not have judges sitting in circuits. We do not have judges sitting in panels of 3 or more, because it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time to empanel these benches. And when this is not happening, for a fact, the wheels of justice will come to a halt. And if we cannot have determinations within the judiciary, then the entire economy of the country cannot grow. Now, if you look at the circular more thoroughly, it seems to lay a lot of emphasis in the Big Four agenda, and it implores other departments of government to scale down in order that there has to be reprioritization. No, there is where the government misses the point. You cannot reprioritize because the particular expenditure that you're seeking to cut is one whose estimate has already been given to the National Assembly. The National Assembly has evaluated and found that to that extent, this particular arm of the government requires this amount of money to function. And to cut down that budget within a period of less than 6 months is, so to speak, to interfere with the independence of the judiciary.
I hear you. And Mercy, there have been several gains that the judiciary has had in the last couple of months. I remember CJ, Chief Justice David Maraga, at some point saying we will digitize the process, court processes. At some point we were talking about reducing the backlog of cases. So this automatically undoes every single good thing that has happened within the judiciary, does it?
And especially with the digitization of the court processes, that was a very great gain that we were going to get. There were steps that had already been initiated and implementation had already started. If this doesn't take place, we are losing greatly. And also the construction of courts that has been going on across the country. We have courts that have already been, construction has started. If that stops, it means we are going to have wasted resources. So definitely we are losing on a lot of gains that we have already achieved as a country. I would like to comment on the issue of the budget cuts and the effects, and whether or not the budget cut can be done, and just picking up on where Nelson Harvey has left. Indeed, once the Appropriation Act was put in place, the budget estimates become law, and that law needs to be implemented. There is no law that allows revision of budget estimates that have been approved by the Parliament downwards. Actually, any estimate appropriation can only be upwards and not downwards.
Okay, I hear you. Nelson Harvey says, okay, fine, you can have budget cuts everything else except the judiciary. Nelson Harvey, talk to me about the fact that this may actually interfere with judicial independence.
It will interfere with judicial independence in several aspects. One, it must be understood that the budget of the judiciary is specifically provided for in the Constitution. The Chief Registrar of the Judiciary is supposed to prepare a budgetary estimate, which is forwarded to the National Assembly for deliberation and consideration. And once the National Assembly has approved this particular budgetary allocation, it becomes a charge in the consolidated fund. And a charge to that extent means that the sum is secure. It's not supposed to be interfered with. We have a situation where the judges are not able to go to particular stations to deliver justice, yet they're earning a salary. We have a situation whereby we're not able to pay the individuals who have leased printers and copiers to the judiciary. We don't have paper, we don't have internet, we can't move judicial staff, we can't buy furniture, we can't pay bills. Look, within a few days, the judiciary will not be able to operate in the manner in which it's supposed to operate. And if that be the case, the manipulation that is likely to arise, either intentionally or unintentionally, will end up subordinating the judiciary to the executive. And that is likely to happen.
And I like that point that you're bringing in, Mercy, and I'm going to put it a little bit on the spot. A couple of weeks ago, we had issues with President Uhuru Kenyatta refusing to appoint the nominees by JSC, the new judges, and he said he had received reports with some questionable issues arising from the reports on the integrity of some of these individuals. So now we're witnessing budget cuts touching on the judiciary up to 3 billion. In 2017, President Uhuru Kenyatta said, and to be specific, he said, we shall revisit. There is a problem within the judiciary and we shall revisit. Do you think this is deliberate to cripple the operations of the judiciary?
I wouldn't say that the actions are deliberate, but what I would say for a fact is that the cuts, the budgetary cuts, and failing to appoint the judges that have been nominated by the Judicial Service Commission, in itself, it's an act of interfering with the independence of judiciary. It affects the operations of the judiciary. The judiciary requires sufficient judicial officers in judges to be able to deliver its efficient and effective services. Without that, definitely then, there is interference of the judicial independence. Without financial independence, again, it's the same thing. the judiciary will require finances to be able to operate effectively and efficiently. And without that, then we can say that clearly there is interference that is going on.
Are we revisiting?
That.
Can Harvey hear me? Nelson Harvey? Okay, I seem to have lost Nelson Harvey. But Mercy, you get to have the final word in this conversation. What is the way forward for Kenya to have a robust, independent judiciary?
We need to have the Constitution implemented. Observance of the rule of law and promotion of constitutionalism, that is the way we are going to be able to preserve the independence of the judiciary. Most important is the implementation of the Judiciary Fund. We are concerned on the delay on the part of the National Treasury in failing to implement the Judiciary Fund. Had that been implemented, wouldn't be where we are right now.
Right, I understand Harvey can hear me. Harvey, if you can hear me, are we revisiting what is the way forward for the judiciary in Kenya?
Now, insofar as the appointment of the 41 judges is concerned, there is a big problem that requires immediate attention. For instance, it is alleged that a substantial number of these appointees are tainted on account of want of integrity on their part. Now, in my honest opinion, that should not be the reason as to why the president should not perform his perfunctory duty of gazetting and appointing these judges. Let's start with the Court of Appeal, for instance. If there are any of the judges who were nominated to go to the Court of Appeal that are tainted, then it will be very easy to deal with them, because out of the 11 appointees, 10 are High Court judges. The fact that they are tainted in the High Court means for whatever reasons, they will still be tainted in the Court of Appeal. Why, therefore, not originate a complaint through the Judicial Service Commission, set up tribunals to try these judges, and if they are found to be unsuitable, then remove them. As relates to the other appointees for the Labour and Land Court, the same procedure can be followed. If it relates to magistrates, then the process of disciplinary and removal of those judicial officials can be undertaken. And then insofar as it relates to those who have been sourced from the private and the public sector, they must of necessity be appointed, and thereafter a tribunal can be formed. And this issue is not novel. We remember during the judicial surgery, we have, for instance, some of the judges that had just been elevated to the Court of Appeal, and within few weeks of their appointment as judges of the Court of Appeal, complaints were received and tribunals were formed. But to let this matter prevail unattended for this long period of time will be a travesty, because it is now quite apparent that the president seems to exercise the final say in the appointment of judges. Yet that was not the intention of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. The Constitution intended that the Judicial Service Commission will have the final say. And it's not that the president is handicapped in the manner in which the Judicial Service Commission undertakes its work. The president has 4 commissioners in the Judicial Service Commission who ought to have been alert, who ought to have advised the president, and if there was any information relating to these nominees, that information ought to have been availed to the Judicial Service Commission so that it could have been considered then. But to claim now that you cannot appoint these judges because you have doubts as to their credentials, you have doubts as to their integrity, is to turn logic over its head.
Okay. Harvey, you've carefully evaded the revisit question, but I'll ask it again another day, but thank you all the same for being part of the big story this evening. Nelson Harvey, who's a lawyer, is joining us from our City Center studio. Big thank you as well to Mercy Wambua, who's the CEO, Law Society of Kenya. Macharia Njeru as well, who's the commissioner with the Judicial Service Commission. Earlier on spoke to my colleague Sophia Wanuna. This has been the big story. Thank you for watching. I'm Linda Ogutu.